Hi guys, Brook Potter here. I've been having a number of conversations with people who are, again, not understanding the definitions of the words concerning things about capitalism, corporatism, as well as socialism and democratic socialism. I may have to do a video on democratic socialism, but nonetheless, anybody who's seen my videos, and I will be putting links up, you'll probably see the button somewhere around here, of the videos that I've done on these subjects. And, in short, capitalism is voluntary exchange. Socialism is the collective ownerships of the means of production, particularly in the form of a co-op. There are various strains of socialism, Marxism, Taoism, Leninism, and so on. And each of them is different as different failings of socialism came to the fore. They just kept shifting the bar to now where we're calling things socialism that aren't even socialism. And then, of course, there's communism, where not just the workers own the means of productions, but society as a whole owns the means of production. But nonetheless, I got into a lot of these discussions, and I wanted to point out some of the differences between private enterprise and state-run enterprises. Now, if you want to call state-run enterprises socialism, you are free to do so. It does not meet the definition of socialism. Some people are calling it the new socialism, but just because you slap a label on it doesn't necessarily it adheres to the ideology as espoused by Marx. But I wanted to talk about this issue in terms of how the differences between private and public state enterprises, how they deal with funding, and how they do deal with funding cuts. Now, both private and public enterprises basically have to, they have resources, and they're trying to utilize those resources as efficiently as possible. In the private market, a company, if it's using the resources that it has to produce a service or a product, if it does so efficiently, it is rewarded with profits. If it does so inefficiently, it is not rewarded with profits, and usually they strike a loss. Now, not all companies that are striking a loss will stay that way. Most companies, when they start out, they operate at a loss until they reach a break-even point when they can start getting, either they have enough customers or enough margin on a product or whatever the case is, to reach a point of profitability. And with that, there is a limited amount of money that a private company can operate with, right? So the money from savings, investment, and profits basically limits the amount of money that they have to operate, and as a result, they're forced to be efficient with the money that they have. Now, government enterprises, that is not the case. Government enterprises are competing for public funds. So each department, whether it's healthcare, education, national defense, welfare, whatever the case might be, they're all trying to suck and get a slice of the public funds. Now, I agree. The public money in any state is generally the biggest source of money that's going to be accumulated within, a particular country. So there's a lot of competition for public funds. But unlike a private company, which, you can basically tell if they're running it efficiently or not because they have profits, state enterprises don't have profits in that sense, in that regard. So as a result, there's no way to tell if a company is actually running efficiently or not. And because of a built-in negative incentive within all government agencies, because they're competing for public money, they're actually incentivized not to accomplish the task that they've been commissioned to do. For instance, if you have some kind of homeless shelter program or something along those lines, it is in the interest of that division, department, whatever, not to solve the homeless problem. Simply for the reason that if they actually did solve the homeless problem, they'd be out of a job, as well as they would not be able to lobby the state for more money in the next year's budget. In fact, because these state enterprises are competing for funds, it is in their interest not to serve the public, not to actually accomplish the task that they've been set out to allow a little bit of chaos and mayhem, for the reasons that they can point to all of these inefficiencies and problems that they have and say, oh my God, look at all these problems we have. We need more money to solve these problems. A very good example of that, of course, out here in the UK is the National Health Service, which is always on the brink of some crisis, chaos, in need of a cash injection and all of these other types of things. Simply because, and again, I'm not saying they're doing this deliberately, but this is the nature of all state-run enterprises. If they actually serve the public, actually, dealt with all of the issues and got everybody the treatment that they needed in time, their budget would be capped, and they would not be able to lobby the government for more money the next year. So as a result of that, a lot of that money ends up going to things that are not necessarily related to patients. It ends up going to administrators of the different trusts. It ends up going to overinflated prices on things like surgical needles and gloves, and we've seen newspaper clippings of that happening in the UK already. And you end up with long wait times and other things which serve the political motives of the NHS, which is you can't petition for more money unless you've got some kind of crisis. Now, I'm not going to deny the defense budget does the same thing, right? Recently, well, not that recently, I think probably 2 years ago, Trump suggested that, no, actually, this was in the UK, a budget cut to the UK national defense budget was suggested, and suddenly you had all of these, 5-star generals suddenly screaming about the Russians, right? And, they could invade at any minute, right? You need... Every government department needs something to point to justify their existence and their funding. So the military is going to point to some boogeyman of the Russians or the Chinese or whatever the case might be. The National Health Service is going to be like, oh my God, look at these long wait times. And we lack beds and infrastructure and doctors and nurses and all these other stuff, all while simultaneously they're increasing their PR department and some of the retirement benefits for the administrators. This is political posturing, and this is every government agency is going to have this problem, right? Whether it's a nationalized railroad, if it's a nationalized power grid, oil refinery, whatever the case might be, because they're all trying to get as much money from the state as possible, rather than serving the public as a private enterprise and trying to use resources efficiently. They're competing for budgets. So that is a built-in negative incentive of all government agencies. Now that brings me to the other side of the coin, which is what happens when there's a cut or a reduction in funding. In the case of a private company, if let's say, they expected to make $1 million and instead they only made $500,000 and they don't have as much money and resources the next year to operate their business, you can be sure that the private enterprise is going to find the least necessary thing or person or resource they need in order to continue their operations, and they're going to try and cut it. So they might, as unfortunate as it is, might cut staff. They might try to find cheaper suppliers. They might consider raising prices as well. That's, but I mean, it has to be in line with their competitors. They don't want to price themselves out of the market, but they're going to try to find the thing that they can cut to save the most money and damage the operation of the business as least as possible, so that they can continue to operate. That is not the case when it comes to government spending and government agencies. At this point, it'll be worth noting that a government cut generally does not mean that the company or the entity receives less money. A lot of spending is kind of designated automatically, and they're expected to have designated increases in their budget. So a government cut really just means a reduction in the rate of increase of their budget. So if a government department is supposed to receive, I don't know, 2% increase in their budget, kind of in line with inflation, a government increase would be, well, you only get a 1% increase in your budget. And now all hell breaks loose. So that's just one of the definitions of, this political language and doublespeak that the state tends to use. But when it comes to government cuts, unlike the private enterprise, they try to find the biggest, most public thing, and they try to shut that down. In the case of, we've seen a couple of government shutdowns in the United States. The one under Obama, it is rumored that the instructions came down that when the government shut down, cause as much problems to the public as possible. And you got pictures of all the parks that were closed, and you had the scouts coming out to like the Washington Monument and crying because the Washington Monument was closed. It was a very public and very, obvious in your face display, and they got lots of public relations spin showing crying children and this government shutdown is causing so much pain and these types of things, right? They probably could have cut a lot of other things, but those types of things caused the public to now campaign on behalf of of whatever it is to get funding reinstated. So that's the way, the two enterprises. The private enterprise will cut the least painful thing. Public enterprise, they will cut the biggest thing to try to get the public on their side. They want something that's going to be painful, something that's going to be obvious, something that's going to give a lot of press, so that the public will campaign to try and have their funding restored. So those are just a couple of the things. There are a lot of other differences between the two. But understanding these things kind of helps you understand why a lot of the government enterprises are in the state that they're in, especially surrounding things like the NHS and all these things. And while I do not oppose the idea of necessarily increasing the funding for some of these enterprises, they will by no means, more money will not solve the underlying issues of these entities. And I fully admit that government enterprises are not the only ones with this problem. Many charities, private charities, suffer from this same issue. That if in fact the Cancer Society funded research and managed to come up with a cure for cancer, they would be out of a job, right? As a result, a lot of that money does not necessarily go to research. It tends to go to more PR, more public relations, more exposure to try and get people to give more, as well as many of the administrators are making six-figure plus salaries. So again, I'm not trying to disparage people for giving to charities. Some are a lot better than others. Some of them actually do a lot of good, but there are a few that, because if they really solve the issue, they'd be out of a job and out of business and stuff like that. That is something that, even private charities can have those same negative incentives. So guys, this is my video. It's fine. Let's have the conversation. If you disagree with me, please feel free to leave a comment below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And hey, a lot of you guys are watching my videos. I think over 92% of you are not subscribed to the channel. Please be sure to subscribe and hit the notification button so you can be alerted whenever new content is put up. And be sure to follow me and my friend Amos Joe on the Shitlord Preachers podcast. It goes out live on Sundays at 5 p.m. GMT. I think it's 12 p.m. Mountain or Central Time. I think, he's in Minnesota. And you can also listen to us on iTunes. And again, guys, as always, thanks for watching. Take care.